Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group. With that, I do want to hand it over to our co-chairs, Douglas and Jim, to get started with today's session as we get going with number 3 in the top 10 best practices for construction contract administration. Douglas and Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everyone. As Matthew said, we are continuing on with our top 10 best practices for construction administration, and glad that everyone could join us today.
Yeah, I echo Doug's welcome. It's good to have you. Please absolutely put your hand up, type comments into Matthew as we go through the slides, and stop us where we need to spend time to get into a deeper discussion. These are always better conversations when they are just that, conversations and not just presentations. So please jump in at any time. Matthew, if you will, let's get started with the next slide. So what we've been doing, plagiarizing Mr. Letterman, is to talk about the top 10 best practices that Doug and I have stumbled across in our careers being construction administrators. So Matthew, the next slide, please. So what we've done, we started with best practice number 10, which is to have fun. We all got into this business for a love of something, and remembering to schedule an opportunity to have some good times while you're doing it is important. Next best practice, number 9, remember your pants pocket. This was a conversation about quality control and quality assurance, being sure that you take the time to let your documents meet one another before they go to the printer for bidding. Best practice number 8, teamwork creates winners. This is not a practice for one, but a practice for many. And when we plan as a team and operate as a team, things go really well. Best practice number 7, hold costs in check, is a reference to being sure that you are going through your documents, your own general conditions and your own documents, to be sure that pay applications are processed properly, change orders have the right percentages of markup, etc., and that you are moving in a timely manner, so that particularly for those of you that do retail work, are opening facilities on time and putting your customers in the business that they intended to be in as soon as you can. Best practice number 6, admitting mistakes is ethically sound, but maybe not what our risk management folks want to see us do. I can't say enough about how many times Doug and I have found that stepping up and taking responsibility for things that are going on with your project has always turned out to be in our best interest. Now, saying something is your mistake is something you want to talk to your liability insurance carriers about before you ever do it, but truthfulness is a wonderful thing. So let's go to the next slide, best practice number 5, which is look at and use the documents. So many times we've seen people, architects, engineers, contractors, not really referring to the documents that are the basis of the contract, but sort of referring to things as the way we've always done it. Certainly don't look at your sites without your documents in your hands, and please don't ever use that term, well, this is the way we always do it. Always refer to your contract documents. And best practice number 4, I should say, is think about the end. The details that you develop through your firm and what you do in your practice it should be providing information over in those most difficult of places to figure out. Don't leave that in the hands of others when you want to establish great detail over flashings or terminations, places where varying materials meet. That's the place to spend your time. And you figure that out before it's figured out in the field. So those are a quick review of what we've done so far, and those are posted online. So the next slide, best practice number 3, which is timeliness is next to wonderfulness. And this is going to be a conversation about time and time management and response. So Matthew, let's look at the first slide here. And, we appreciate respect when it's given to us. We often expect respect. We must give it back. In the construction business and design business especially, the respect of time of others is a paramount piece of our business. So we're going to talk here. Let's look at the next slide. As Doug and I have told you before, from the very beginning of the project, we're going to talk about the start, we're going to talk about the middle, and we're going to talk about the end in the construction phase. So here we are at the preliminary beginning of the project. And the next slide says that the project is within the bid. It's in the money. Doug and I have presented a lot of conversations that we've shared with you are based in the design, bid, build kind of scenario. We both have done other delivery methods, but the design, bid, build is where most of our experience is. And so we've honed this conversation to be centered mostly around that. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll start there. And Doug, let me just introduce this one, and then I'll stop for a minute. And Matthew, we'll see if there are any hands raised, or Doug, if there's anything you have to kick us off. So the project's been bid, it's within the money, and you're going to go to work. One of the things that is early and easy is establishing the start date, that notice to proceed. And, our experience has been that it should be based on real project data and real project information. Often it's an arbitrary date set by someone other than the designer or the contractor. Almost never is a contractor invited to that table. It's typically an owner-specified issue. And we have found that a conversation about that start date often goes well with the owner. It certainly is appreciated by the contractor in bringing them into that conversation about what the beginning is actually going to be. And a big part of the reason for that is because the buying out of the project today in the design, bid, build method is a tremendous challenge for the construction community. And a recognition of that on our part starts to create that team basis from the very beginning, and that's a critical part of the beginning of the project. So, Doug, I'm going to pause for a minute, and Matthew, tell us if there are any questions as well.
Well, as Jim was saying, I think it's important to engage the owner and the contractor in the discussion as to when is the project start date. I have been in some situations where the owner will receive the bids on, let's say, a Tuesday. He looks at them and reviews them and makes a decision on a Wednesday and expects the design professional or the architect to have the contract in the hands of the low bidder on Thursday and expects the low bidder to start on Friday. And I would say that that's not a realistic schedule, and we need to do our best to educate the owners as to the time it takes for things to happen, and be respectful, as Jim was saying before, of the contractor while they are submitting the bid and in hopes of getting the job. There's no guarantee from their part that they're going to get the job, and so they have many balls in the air at one time, and expecting them to be able to start within 2, 3, 5 days of the submission of the bids, I just do not think is reasonable. So getting them involved in that, finding out what's a good day for you. The owner wants to do it as soon as possible. Can you do it Friday? Does Monday work better? Having those kind of discussions, I think, including the contractor, will help you to start on a good foot and start building a decent relationship with the contractor, so you can go forth with the project. So, Matthew, do we have anything from the audience?
No, at this time the audience is still pretty quiet.
Well, let's go to the next slide and talk about that very first step often for the contractor. And this is what Doug was pointing out. So, yes, setting a start date is a really simple thing on the design side, on the owner side. The process has been pretty much hurry up and get this done as soon as you possibly can. And we'll take a look at another slide after this one in just a minute. But that buyout process is something that we need to pause and take a look at as design professionals. Certainly, if it is done properly, then there's a great opportunity for the reduction of misunderstandings, mistakes, definitely where conflicts can be straightened out before perhaps subcontracts are signed. So the contractor immediately starts issuing these subcontracts, contacting suppliers, trying to work out purchase orders. There are final negotiations, and I want to be sure that you understand we're not talking about bid shopping, because that is something that we know has occurred in the past. There are pieces of proposals that may get shared by contractors about other subs, and they're attempting to lower the cost for them and try to negotiate a contract. So, that's not what we're referring to when we talk about these negotiations. But there are some qualifications that are typically associated with subcontractors' proposals to the general contractors that have to be worked out, and this is part of what's going on in the buyout process. Who's paying for shipping? What are the submittals or the shop drawings cost? And how do price escalations in materials get covered? What about the final schedule? We qualified it and said we couldn't do it in that period of time. We needed more time. So again, this is all between the contractor and per subs, but it is a part of conversationally what Doug and I think should be considered when we're in that first beginning parts of the project. I've had owners and contractors sit together, and we've discussed delaying the start date for 30 days from a bid, or 60 days from a bid, asking the contractor that your number is going to stay the same, but these are the opportunities that kind of delay gives you. Is that something that would be beneficial to your buyout process, to your planning for the job? Thinking about issues like weather. Perhaps we're going to wait through a bad season and start the clock in a good season. What does that mean for you? So these are all conversations that Doug and I are just suggesting that you consider. Like them or not, decide to use them or not, that there are ways that have helped us be successful on projects in the past. So let's go to the next slide. And Doug, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, let's keep moving along.
Okay. So, and referring back to the best practice about honesty, are we in a bind and are we trying to issue that notice to proceed really quickly because maybe there was never a reasonable project schedule in the first place? Or perhaps, we said, yes, we want the job. We said, yes, we can finish it by Thursday. But of course we couldn't, and we didn't, and it's full of issues that need to be straightened out or corrected. How did it get behind schedule in the first place? Was there time to really do the project and create the contract documents that we should? Perhaps not. Often I have seen with folks that I have worked with that has been the case. There was too little time to do too much work. And so these are the opportunities. Well, we know we have a little egg on our face, so let's take a minute to really set a reasonable date there before we start the clock to maybe work out some of those issues. And it's critical, let's look at the next slide, Matthew, to know what our roles and our responsibilities are. It's not a lions versus us or us versus the soldiers. You know, this is a team sport. So we need to know exactly what our responsibilities are and how we relate to each other. We need to be sure that the contract documents are properly done and that they too clearly denote the roles and the responsibilities of the various parties. All of these go to timeliness of completion, of timeliness of communication, and we'll talk about those things as we go through the slides here. But really, really important, that last note there, to understand what the expectations of each other are or is. What is the expectation of the owner when they involved us, and what is their expectation of the contractor, and the same from our perspectives. The opportunity in your we have general conditions or supplementary general conditions. The opportunities for addressing time-related issues are something that happens before the bid and are an opportunity to get the most done ahead of shooting that starting pistol for the beginning of construction. Doug? Any other comments?
Nothing to add here.
Okay. So let's move, Matthew, to the next slide, into the middle of construction. We've gone past the preliminary scheduling part, and now we're into the full schedule and full construction, the heat of the battle. The fire is burning hot. So let's take a look at that next slide and talk about one of the things that is really important to a project, and that is project momentum. It's a real thing, and it's something that is very important to nurture and to keep pace with. This is not a time in the throes of construction for us to get sidetracked into a tug-of-war attitude where it's us versus them. And we want to talk about a few of the opportunities that relate to project momentum that Doug and I have experienced. So let's take a look at that next slide. One of the opportunities we feel like are the pieces of information that travel back and forth, like the requests for information and shop drawings are two to touch on. What is the need for the management of those documents within the project itself? Not what suits us, not what fits our schedule, I'm sure no one on this call has in their office at this very moment a stack of shop drawings somewhere to be reviewed, and the date on the piece that's on the bottom of that stack is 45 to 60 days ago. I'm just sure that's not happening. But Doug and I have had that experience, and it's a bad place to get yourself on a project, even in the best of circumstances. So, establishing an agreement, Matthew, let's take a look at that next slide, that is both mutually acceptable and is an honest comment about how you're going to receive information during construction and how you're going to return answers or responses or products of that information back to the contractor is critical to do from the start. Doug, I'll stop a minute. I'm talking too much, and I'll let you.
Well, I wanted to add, as you are mutually agreeing to the review and return of documents, it needs to be reasonable, and be careful when you are signing contracts with your owner where there are specific time periods in there for the return of RFI responses or submittals or shop drawings. If it's in the contract and you've agreed to do it in 3 days and you do it in 4 days because you were busy or got sick or for whatever reason, that 1 day late is a breach of your contract because you agreed you were going to do it in 3 days. That 1 day late could be a delay claim from the contractor because he's reviewed the general conditions and in some cases may have even reviewed your contract with the owner. He's expecting for it to be returned in 3 days, and it wasn't returned, and he wasn't able to start his next process because he didn't have the returned RFI response. And the same is true for submittals. Typically, I've seen the turnaround time in contracts for submittals is usually longer than RFIs. But again, be careful, especially with both RFIs and submittals. Well, one thing to consider too about submittals is that there's the time it takes for you to get the submittal. There's the time it takes for you to get it to your consultant, assuming that it is a item that your consultant needs to review, then his time to review it, and then he got time to get it back to you, and then you need to return it back to the contractor. Now, if you put in the documents that you've got 5 days to review the submittal, and it takes 3 or 4 days to get the circulation piece done for you to receive it, for you to get it to the consultant, for the consultant to get it back to you, and then you get it back to the contractor, then you're down to 1 day to review it. And whose day is that? Is that your consultant's day? Is that your day? So be careful when you're agreeing to specific turnaround times in your contract, and make sure that if you put them in there, that you adhere to them.
That's right. There are several opportunities. Sometimes we see a submittal schedule be a part of the specification documents issued before bidding. At other times, we've seen dedicated specification sections to submittals, to requests for information or interpretation, where there's not only the turnaround discussion about the time to receive and process, but actual forms that are issued with the expectation of the construction team using those specific forms. Forms that you have created that are your standards, or perhaps the owner's, the project standard, particularly if you're doing multiple work chain kind of facilities where there are multiple similar projects. And we'll touch on that too here. But having that thought through and have that be a thoughtful process of, as Doug mentioned, the bundling, where there are other consultants that need to look at parts of a package before the whole package can be returned, are important to have thought about ahead of time. And then let's take a look at that next slide real quick. Matthew, any questions so far?
Yeah, we actually have a few coming in, so I'm going to try to get to those before we move on. First one, I think, directly talks to what we're talking about here. Buckley asks, shop drawing review times are typically set up front prior to bid. Are you now suggesting this should be a negotiated time after bid?
I'm sorry, Jim. The standard AIA contract language, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase. For shop drawing review, it says to do it expeditiously so as to not cause a delay to the project. The standard AIA language does not set a set number, does not have in it a set time period, a set number of days. It says you should do it as fast as you can and in a manner that would not delay or cause an impact to the project. A lot of times I've seen in your owner architect agreements where the owner will put in your contract a set number of days. Shop drawings need to be reviewed within 7 days. Oftentimes, it is not realistic, it is not possible to review all shop drawings within 7 days. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that if you come across a contract that has that term in there where it's giving you a set number of days, you need to make sure that you can meet that, or in the alternative, and what might be better, is educate your client and convince them that that's not a good thing. Because if you've got to turn it around in 7 days and you're not able to do a thorough review, then that's not good for the contractor, you, or the owner.
That's exactly right. I'll just throw in there, Doug, a great example of that may be paint. You know, you've got to get the steel and the rebar done quickly, but there may be paint manufacturers that don't offer certain colors that your client wants. And that review can happen a year from now and still not negatively impact the schedule of the project. I think, tacking on to what Doug said, having the language where the review is appropriate to the schedule of construction and not listing a specific set number of days, and then having the opportunity to sit down and negotiate that schedule is certainly a valid way to approach it without being caught with your owner-architect agreement and then with your owner-contractor agreement to have an arbitrary set of days in there, which really doesn't relate to the construction process at all.
And I think what we're talking about when we're talking about negotiating the schedule in terms of submittals is that's in the typically in the documents you require your contractors to submit a submittal schedule, and then you have an opportunity at that point to comment on it. So if he's got everything coming within the first week after he signs the contract, that's not going to be realistic for you to be able to review all that stuff and turn it. And this is an extreme example, but it's not going to be realistic for you to review all that and turn it around in that time frame. And as Jim mentioned, there are items that don't need to be reviewed immediately right up front. So work with your contractor to put together a reasonable submittal schedule that meets his requirements for being able to get the work done and meets your requirements so you can fulfill your obligations to do a thorough review and get them returned to him in a timely manner.
Matthew, you said there were some others?
Yeah, there's one that was more a comment, I think, that kind of ends up and recaps this conversation as well. Charles points out receiving submittals that include all pieces of the submittal instead of receiving submittal information on a piecemeal basis would also facilitate a more timely review of the submittal documents.
Amen. That's exactly right. We love those bundles, don't we, Doug?
Yeah, and to take that a step further, there may be some submittal packages where you want to have two different items from two different spec sections so you can see how the two are going to work together. And so it's not just the one submittal, say it's metal panels and curtain wall, and you need to see how the two are going to integrate. So you need to consider those items as well, because the one informs the other.
And then we have a more general question here. It came in from Bassam. With regards to technical specifications, which include the material to be procured, as mentioned in the prepared contract documents, who should be responsible to check if properly done in the management of the documents, or if it's even matching the guidelines of CSI or AIA?
I'm not sure I'm following the question, but let me say this. The architect is the author of the documents. The architect is the one that should be, or that has the duty and the responsibility to make sure that those documents are complete and accurate for whatever project it is that they're working on. It is not the contractor's job to do a quality control review of your drawings and to catch your errors. It is not the owner's responsibility to do that either, just like it's not the architect's responsibility to be the quality control for the contractor. So in terms of putting the documents together and making sure that they're in a format or a content that is usable, that is the architect's responsibility.
All right, Bassam, if that doesn't address your question, feel free to please leave a different comment or additional comment for us. But that is all the comments we have currently. So I will move on to the next slide for you.
Yeah, you just spend a second there. The thing to remember is this: whatever the agreements are, communication is so critically important during the project. You be the one to call and tell your partners, your teammates, that you're behind. Don't let that be a surprise, and don't let that call come to you. But communicate that you tried to do your best to be timely, you have slipped your schedule, you're behind, and have an answer for when you're going to have it finished, so that your teammates can get their idea, their eyes and hands back around the schedule and what kind of impact that may have for them. As Doug said, a day here and there can make a tremendous difference, particularly when you think about things like production processes and where there's a queue in the production in a plant, and this project holds its place, anticipating a certain date of return of documents. So communicate when you get behind schedule. Let's go to the next slide, Matthew. And one of the things that that we have found that it does several things. Inviting your teammates to do that review together has been beneficial many times. There are things that may come up in a review of the package together that you didn't think of, and it certainly is something that helps the owner become familiar with the site that they're going to manage. I've had the contractor, the subcontractor, material provider, the owner's team of facility management, our engineers, other consultants sit at a table and go through a review of a document. Now, we didn't stamp it right there and sign it and turn it back over, but the gist of the review was done as a group, and it brought up several things that were important for us to catch, things that I wouldn't have caught if I had done that review alone. So it's an opportunity to think about the timeliness of your response. As Doug was talking about, there are often other consultants that need to have their say about certain documents. This might be an opportunity to do that as well. And one last thing, back to that comment about the submittal on the bottom of that pile that's been in your office for 60 days. Oh my goodness, what happens when you finally get to look at it and it's not even a specified product? Then what happens? You have 3 that you're willing to look at, and it is a 4th, and maybe it's not equal. Then what are you going to look like when you're sending it back 60 days old saying rejected, resubmit? That's not a spot you want to find yourself in. So when a submittal comes in that isn't specified, or when a submittal comes in that hasn't been reviewed by the general contractor, they've just passed it through their office, and often that's clear to you. You can see that it didn't have the kind of review that it needed. When those come in, send them back. Immediately send them back with your comments that this submittal is unreviewed and it hasn't been reviewed for the following reason, and get it back into the hands of the general contractor. That may be difficult the first time you do it, and that might not be a fun conversation, but it sets a precedent for the timeliness that you intend to use in responding to open issues on the project. Doug?
I think that's an excellent point. Even though you may have agreed to a time period to review a submittal, be it 7 days, 14 days, whatever, don't, unless you absolutely have to, take that whole time. Don't let it sit for a week and then wait for the day before it's due to decide to review it so you can get it back within the schedule. Look at it as soon as possible. Get it back to the contractor as soon as possible. Because those days that it's sitting there not doing anything are days that, especially if it's a revise and resubmit, it's days that the contractor could be using to pull together the correct submittal and get it in front of you so that it can get in that production line and help maintain the project schedule.
Matthew, have any questions or raised hands at this point?
No, we are quiet at the moment.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the next slide. So one of our opportunities in being a team player here is remembering, going back to how much time did we eat up in the design process before we shot the starter's pistol and got this whole thing going. What conditions are the contractor and their team working under? Have we eaten up the good season and we're starting construction in the winter? Is it the rainy season and we have an elaborate set of foundations, and before we even start those foundations, a tremendous amount of site work where there's a lot of cut on a property or on a project site, and we're again in bad times of year. These considerations of schedule, while they may be difficult conversations to have with your client, where you're saying, this is off a season, we need to shift this later, and here are the things that give us this gives us the opportunity to do. But just keep in mind, when the questions come into the site, be respectful of time, but be respectful of the question. Now, we all have had exposure to unnecessary questions. We all have had questions come in that were clearly included in parts of the contract documents, and that's an irritant for sure. And it may be an opportunity for you to share that when you answer the question. But think about the conditions that the construction community is working under out there, and how quickly you need to respond to keep that momentum going on the project. Sure, they can query a computer model if they have access to it, and if it's such that they can do so, but it's not unreasonable for questions to come in that we can certainly help with and not take that sort of a position. And let's take a look at the next slide real quick. One of the things that Doug and I both have talked about in the past is stop asking for so much crap. I don't know why in the world so many firms list so much information to come into them as submittals, product data, shop drawings. I fear that it is only because they are listed in the model specifications that you're using to update for your project, and perhaps you're hesitant to take them out. I really don't understand why, and it leads one to believe that maybe there's great value. I just wonder, of everyone on the call right now, how many of you could turn around in your office and take off the shelf one of those little boxes of ceiling grid metal that is the grid, and one of those little stacks of 4x4 ceiling tile, and how many of those you have in your office? They must be made of gold. We think there's great value in them somewhere because so many of them are stacked up in offices around the country. It's not necessary. Let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll tell you a story about how easy it is to not do that. So we have a friend who, we're very fortunate to have the Lowe's Corporation be headquartered in North Carolina in the past. And Doug and I have a friend who was a corporate architect there who came to one of the seminars that Doug and I were doing. This is, just forgive me, it's a little bit of bragging here, but I'm pretty excited about this. Corporate architect was at one of our conversations where we talked about this opportunity to not have so many things to come into you that are requiring your time to go through. So when you have a customer that is a corporate customer that perhaps does the same thing 100 times a year, stop and think about the timeliness of what you could do to change the way you manage that project. So our friend went back to his company, and he called me up and he said, guess what we're doing? We're doing a certification process now. I said, wow, well, tell me what that means. So let's use ceiling grid and ceiling tile as an example. This is a product that we can easily say this is the one we want. If it's a competitive bid, we're able to say that this is a single source that's required because of our number of properties and our attic stock and how we want all that equipment to be the same in what we have set aside and saved to maintain our properties. And so we want to see you use this product. What we need from you is a certification from you and from your subcontractor and from your installers that they guarantee to us that this is exactly the product and this is exactly the method to be used to install it. You put that on a piece of paper, one page, you put your stamp on it, you sign it and seal it and send that to us, and it will go in our file. And there is no need for product. There's no need for the little boxes of grid and tile. And that product and that review and that specification section is finished, and we're done. Thank you very much. So there are these sorts of opportunities out there that we may be able to reduce the amount of information that we require to be submitted. But when we talk about this in presentations, we often get the question, well, the only problem with that is, and I can fill in a lot of those, but one of them is, well, the general contractor uses that package, that submittal, as a part of his contract with his subcontractor. And so he requires us to review it. Well, hold on. Think about who your contract is with, and what your contract says with your owner, your client, is what should drive that, not the general contractor's contract with his sub. So this may be one of those submittals that you receive unrequested, unrequired, that you simply document, returned unreviewed, and ship it back. The basis of their contract with their sub is not something that we are a part of or a party to, and so that's an opportunity to reduce the amount of material that we put our hands on and run through our offices. Sorry I went so long there. Let me be quiet.
Well, Jim, this is one of my pet peeves, and the ceiling submittal is a prime example of it. Using the certification process you described, you can just think of amount of time that would save you to only have to receive a letter from the contractor certifying that they are using the product that you specified, as opposed to the time it would take to review a submittal on a ceiling where you've asked for the little 6-inch piece of grid and a little 4x4-inch square piece of tile, and then the product data and the test results. Does it meet the STC requirements and all of that you've already given them that's in the spec? And then you've got to go and pull all that stuff out and look at it again, as opposed to just getting a one-page letter saying, I certify I'm using XYZ manufacturer's ABC ceiling tile. And if you specified XYZ and ABC ceiling tile in your spec, you don't need to look at all of that other stuff and have that stuff lying around in your office and spending time reviewing it to compare it to what you wrote in the spec to make sure that it matched. You can cut down a lot of your time, which can save you money or allow you to use that time to focus on other things by using that certification process. As Jim was talking, I just pulled a spec off my bookshelf and just flipped it open, and it ended up opening up on plastic lockers, and I went down to see what was asked for in submittals. So we've got plastic lockers, we've got product data, we got product test reports, shop drawing samples for initial select, samples for verification. Now, instead of looking at all that stuff, if you went through the certification process, you've got one item, one piece of paper, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things to look at. So you've cut your time tremendously. And I'm sure manufacturers for lockers have tested their products, but when you're specifying the lockers and you're asking for test results, I would question, what test are you looking for? What is it that you're trying to accomplish by asking for those test results on a plastic locker? I mean, we ask for stuff that sometimes just doesn't make a lot of sense. And one quick story, I was doing construction administration on a project that I was not involved in the design in. And in the specification, it asked for something to be submitted, some documentation to be submitted, and I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had a name in the spec to submit this certain documentation. The contractor called me up and asked me, well, what is it? And I had never heard of it before, and I went on the internet and I couldn't find it. And so we discussed it for a while, and neither one of us knew what it was, and got back with the person that wrote the document. They didn't know what it was. Apparently it was something that was held over from the master spec software or whatever specification software they were using. So nobody knew what it was. And so what we ended up doing was he submitted a document and called it whatever the name was that this thing called for, so that he would meet the requirements of having submitted everything they needed to submit. And since nobody knew exactly what it was being asked for, no one could say he was wrong. So just be careful, edit your specs, and only ask for what you need to review.
That's right. Matthew, let's see if we have any questions, and at the same time you can go to the next slide, because we're going to talk about timeliness and responsiveness right to the end.
We do actually have a few questions that have come in here. First one, I'm actually going to go in reverse order what we had. So the first one coming in here from Charles. From Buckley. Do you think a one-page letter would demand more CA services to verify what was certified as?
Well,
I don't.
I don't either. Go ahead, Doug.
I mean, if you, and I'm going to throw out the ceiling tile example again. If you want an Armstrong Tegular Dunes ceiling tile, white, everyone knows what that is. And to get a letter from the contractor saying, I certify that I'm going to use Armstrong Tegular Dune ceiling tile with a 9/16" grid, white finish, that's, looking at that letter is a whole lot quicker and a whole less CA time than getting a package where you're looking at the samples of the 6-inch pieces of grid and the 4-inch tile and the product data and test results and all the other stuff that you might ask for with a ceiling submittal.
And I would say too, in addition to that, these examples that we're giving are opportunities for products that are well known, that you've used before, that are perhaps one of the 3 or more that you have included in your project specification. Perhaps not something that is a brand new product to you that you're not familiar with, but these opportunities are ones that we're talking about, things that are very familiar and very, I hate to use the word, but very typical or widely used. So that it wouldn't take a lot of research time for you to confirm that certification, because that's the point in allowing for a certification process.
All right, we had additional question. I have a feeling I know the answer to here from Scott, saying, do you have a sample form of the product certification you could share with us?
Well, I don't have one that I can put my hands on, but that's something that I can look into and perhaps share something. Matthew can get it to you, and you can post it with the handouts for next month. All
right, perfect. We did have a question came in here 2 slides ago from Phil, saying, in addition to those unreviewed by the general contractor, submittals which do not even have the specific items you've called for highlighted or marked should be returned immediately. Even for the sake of time, I want to know that contractor knows what we want on the project.
Absolutely. Everybody on this call has probably received boxes and boxes of those where they just got passed through, and that's an indicator that the contractor didn't go through it, that they just simply received something from their sub and they didn't want to take the time to denote exactly the product. Yes, that's exactly right. Ship it back and say, you've got to do your part and then I'll do mine.
Agreed.
And then tying that comment in with the comments and conversation we've had here about that certified option, there was a comment that came in here from Charles. I went back and forth with him. He said, no need to ask the question, but I think it works out well as a way to cap up this conversation as well. He just said that, what happens when the architect arrives on site and finds the wrong ceiling grid and tiles installed anyway? And he indicated specifically with the government projects, you really can run into problems with submittals occasionally.
My response to that would be whether it's a certification letter or whether it was a full-blown ceiling submittal, you could still end up in the same place. And I don't think that the certification letter puts you at more of a risk of ending up in that same place. If you've got a contractor that is not paying attention and it is not going to follow the documents, then when he's putting in the wrong stuff, then you fulfill your requirements and notify the owner and notify the contractor that it's non-conforming work and it needs to be corrected. Again, I don't think the certification letter puts you more at risk of that. It's the contractor's duty and responsibility to make sure that he is complying with the documents. Your review of the shop drawings is for the limited purpose, and I'm paraphrasing from the AIA language again, it's for the limited purpose of verifying that the contractor is intending to perform with your design intent. With a full-blown ceiling submittal, there's still no guarantee that he's not going to put in something other than what was submitted. Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, Matthew, we can keep conversing here, but let's move on through the slides, and then you interrupt me if there are some other questions. So right to the end of the project here, we get to the next slide is what have we done during our CA role? Have we performed our services properly? We've been looking and commenting at the work as it was going on. And certainly at this point is not the time to get even. If we've been a team player and we've been responsive and we've done our job, creating a book for the punch list at this phase is not the attitude to have, because who does that make look bad? It's as if we haven't been there throughout the whole process. And we've talked other times about how important it is to take corrective action and be sure that work needing correction is straightened out immediately. So let's look at the next slide. Where we are here at the end is getting the facility turned over to the owner because it now is ready to be used for the purpose for which it was intended. And it is complete. Let's take a look at that next slide. So which of these is ready for you to come do your punch list? I've been called to both at the request of the contractor who said, I'm ready for you to punch my project. One says install ceiling, install lights, install carpet, install paint, install casework. That's not a punch list. It's certainly not the appropriate use of your time. It isn't respectful of your time, and creating a voluminous list is only going to create issues that continue past the completion date. So what we have done to this point to do our job properly is to make the comments that need to be made about things that need to be corrected and adjusted and fixed. We've done our job to support the team members and be able to facilitate the construction to be complete in a timely manner and done properly in accordance with the contract documents. So this is not a scenario where you want to catch yourself, but I can tell you that picture on our right had a lot to do with the designer not returning documents and not returning answers and not dealing with RFIs and submittals properly. And that was the condition it was in on the day it was supposed to be complete. So we share this to remind you that we have a great opportunity even in the very end, and we've taken most of that opportunity at the beginning of the job to feed information along so that this is not where we end up. And certainly on that next slide, and this really is the last one, be sure that you keep the money flowing with work that's done in accordance with the contract documents so that the contractor can be paid, so that the subcontractors can be paid, so that everyone is happy, responsive, and productive. And this is one of the timely requirements that I'm sure most in the construction side of our business would say is your most important to respond to. But processing your applications for payment as you go through construction is one of those critical activities to get done and get done on a timely basis, and is one of those, and Doug, I'll hush, is one of those that can expose you to great risk if you don't handle it that way.
We talked about RFIs and submittals and now applications for payments, but any other documents that you need to handle and any other responsibilities, do them in a timely manner, whether it's reviewing a change order request or change order proposal or whatever it might be. Do it in a timely manner. It will serve you as well as your client and contractor well. It doesn't do anyone any good to sit on stuff and let it back up. It puts more stress on you. It makes the job less fun when you're rushing or having to pull an all-nighter. So just plan your time and take care of stuff in a timely manner.
Matthew, that concludes our slides, except for the invitation to our next gathering. Are there any final questions from anyone?
I know we are over time, but here's a quick one to kind of recap the last question while I go to the next slide. A question here is, do you advocate for preliminary punch list efforts when requested by the contractor?
Well, let me go first, Doug, and then I'll pass to you. I guess I would say yes, I do. My personal practice is to meet with the contractor and do that sort of a preliminary review in some few spaces. This is what we're looking for. And in one or two or several similar conditions, this is a classroom, this is a meeting room, this is a conference room, this is an office, this is a common space. These are the things that we're going to be looking for. This is what the owner's team is going to be looking for. So I have had that be very successful in the past, where we did a preliminary review and it gave everyone sort of a bar that was set. Now, that bar should relate directly to your specifications and industry requirements for that product as well. So that's been successful for me. Doug?
I guess I do and I don't. I would rather, as the work is progressing, make sure that when I'm doing my site visits that I am letting the contractor know what the expectations are at that point. And as finishes are going up and the project is wrapping up, I hope that I've done my job well enough to where he knows what the expectations are and that we don't have to walk through. And I know, Jim, you weren't talking about walking through the whole thing. You're just doing some examples for typical rooms, and you weren't going through every room. But I would hope that I've done my job well enough in going through with the contractor prior to that point to where he knows what those expectations are. I have done, as Jim said before, gone in some typical spaces, especially if you're doing like at school with a lot of classrooms or hospitality and you got hotels with multiple rooms that are repeated, where you go in one room of that type and establish what's acceptable, what's the bar is going to be. And as Jim said, it is helpful and can be very beneficial.
Matthew, it's all yours.
All right, well, I'm just going to wrap it up with a comment here from Charles as we get going to the end of the session here. Charles has pointed and said also he recommends mock-ups can also play a huge role in addressing quality standards for completion of work. So wanted to sneak that comment in there. But as you can see on the screen, everybody, we are still scheduling our fourth Tuesday of the month calls. So we will be doing number 2 in the practice group's top 10 list this next month in October 25th from 12 to 1. So look forward to that registration link going out shortly to you all, and we hope to see you there. And additionally, before I hand it back to Jim and Douglas to say thank you and close up the night, I also want to thank everyone for coming. A reminder that if you want the slides, they are currently in the handout section until this webinar is closed. Feel free to go on there quick and download that PDF. And a reminder that today's recording will be posted to the YouTube channel in case anybody had any audio issues or wants to go back and recap this or share this with any other coworkers. So with that, Jim and Doug, I hand it over to you for the final statements and hope to see you all next month.
Doug, let me go first, and then let me go first. Yeah, let me go first, and then you close. It's so appropriate that on the timeliness seminar we went almost 10 minutes over. I apologize for that. It's all yours, Doug.
Thanks, everyone. We do apologize for going over, but we hope it was worth it to everyone and hope to see you back next October or next month.